What's up guys, Mickle here, and one of the biggest recent FUD pieces against XRP and the XRP ledger is that banks and institutions are never going to use XRP. There are so many people saying recently that Ripple has pivoted away from the big institutions. They're not going to be working with the banks, and because of this, these large institutions are never going to have any incentive to actually use or hold XRP. Well, in this video, I want to give you my perspective on this and let you guys know why I think this is completely wrong. Now, I think this is a very unique thesis. Not a lot of people are talking about this at all, so make sure to stick around for this whole thing because it's really important to understand. Like always, your support means so much to this channel. If you enjoy these videos, make sure to take a quick second to like this video and subscribe to my channel. It's really going to help me out so much. Also, if you ever need a good place to buy some XRP or the Flare token, make sure to check out my favorite exchange Uphold down in the description of this video. With that said though, let's jump right into it, and I hope you guys enjoy the content. So it seems like every single time price doesn't move for a while or price goes down, so many people start attacking XRP and coming out with all these different FUD points. One of the biggest ones I have been hearing recently is that Ripple has pivoted and they're no longer working with the biggest institutions out there. Ripple is no longer looking to work with the banks. And the second thing is that none of these institutions will ever hold XRP. So I want to start off and address the first thing, which is Ripple pivoting away from the banks? And I think this is such a weird thing to bring up because as I see it, Ripple is engaging with banks more than ever. Right now, we currently have Ripple publicly working with over 10 central banks. On top of that, we have heard from Ripple's CBDC team that they're actually working with 20 more central banks on the back end working on developmental projects. So right here, we see that Ripple is working with close to 30 central banks. Now, there is only about 117 central banks in the entire world, so Ripple, who is in their very early stage of their CBDC product, is already working with close to 20% of the central banks out there. Now, I don't understand how people see something like this and say, oh, Ripple is pivoting away from the banks. They are clearly working directly with the largest banks in the entire world. And it's so important to understand how the banking systems work. In order for Ripple to really work with the smaller banks in a big way, they need to get the approval of the central banks. It's the largest banks in all these different ecosystems, and the central banks are the ones who typically issue assets, so Ripple needs to start from the top, and that's with the central banks. This is so important to understand because if Ripple is already working with 20% of the central banks out there, then I think it's safe to say that Ripple has heavy involvement in the biggest banks out there. Now, this is something that a lot of people just completely ignore. They see Ripple working with money transmitters, they see Ripple working on different projects and are saying, oh, Ripple must be done with the banks. But all you have to do is look at who Ripple is working with right now to understand Ripple is heavily still engaging with these institutions. So I wanted to start off and just address that quickly. I think that's a really easy kind of FUD point to dispel. Ripple is making fantastic progress with these central banks, and I just don't understand why people think this isn't happening. Now, the next thing I want to touch is whether or not these large institutions like these banks are going to hold XRP or going to utilize the XRP ledger. So the first thing that people always say is these banks are never going to use public XRP. They're just going to use sidechains. They're going to use sidechains of the XRP ledger, and that's not actually XRP. So to start, I think that's a really valid point. A lot of these big banking institutions and a lot of these governments and central authorities are not going to use the public XRP ledger. It doesn't make sense. If you are running a business, why would you want everyone in the entire world to see all your transactions? It just doesn't make sense to do those kinds of things on a public ledger. A lot of these central banks are going to use forks of the XRP ledger. They're going to be private versions that interact with the public XRP ledger. Now, that alone is still extremely bullish to me. They're still connected to the public XRP ledger for public liquidity, and I still think they utilize the public XRP ledger for cross transfers, for currency transfers to move within different assets. At the end of the day, the internet of value is about connectivity. It's about being able to interact with different systems, and it's about being open and public. I don't think these closed wall gardens are the end game. I think even if central banks do have their assets segregated from the public ledger, they will still ultimately touch the public ledger because that's where all the liquidity is. That is the game-changing innovation. We already have closed databases. We already have banks who are using centralized systems. So it's really not that much innovation for these banks to be using private ledgers. It's essentially what they're doing already, except with some new technology on the back end. The public ledger is the real innovation. The public ledger is the real game changer. So what I am saying is regardless if they build side systems on these private ledgers, ultimately, there's still going to be a large portion of value coming over to the public ledger. And the other very, very important thing to understand here is just how these banks and institutions work. Right now, we have so many of these big banks and institutions holding all kinds of different assets that have all different risk profiles. One of the biggest assets these banks and institutions hold is something called junk bonds. It's literally junk bonds. It's literally just crappy debt. Now, they hold this because it generates yield and it's an investment product for them. But I don't understand how people could look at these institutions holding things like junk bonds and saying they will never hold a cryptocurrency in the future. Right now, we are in the very early stages of cryptocurrencies. They're very volatile and speculative, but as they mature, institutions are going to look at these assets very differently. They're going to look at them for their benefits. They're going to look at them for how they can generate yield. These banks and institutions are already looking to very risky places to generate yields. I just talked about junk bonds, but there's so many more. Eventually, in the future, as cryptocurrencies start maturing, they're going to look like a much better investment vehicle than many of the investments these institutions are already touching. So if you take that fact I just gave you and couple it with what we talked about earlier, which is Ripple is working with some of these massive institutions, some of these massive banks to create private payment systems on the back end using XRP ledger technology, you think about what assets these institutions are going to be looking at in a future system where they are investing in cryptocurrencies and using them as investment products, well, clearly XRP is going to be at the top of their list. Why would they build payment rails on private versions of the XRP ledger and then invest in assets like Solana or invest in something like Cardano? Obviously, XRP is going to be at the top of their list. What Ripple is really doing is they are taking the XRP ledger and putting it right next to the most important institutions in the entire world, the big money, the people who really drive innovation and the people who really drive liquidity. This is so important to understand because this is something other crypto projects aren't doing. They're building in the retail sector. They're trying to shut out the big money. They're trying to shut out the institutions. They're trying to shut out the players of our traditional financial system. What Ripple is doing instead is going to these players and saying, hey, we'll build you whatever you want. And when you're ready, XRP and the public ledger is right here. This is what I think people are really having a hard time wrapping their head around. They're trying to find the exact way XRP is going to interact with these institutions. They're trying to find the exact way the public XRP ledger is going to hook up to these big banks and payment providers. But at the end of the day, it almost doesn't matter. All you need to do is have a thesis that blockchain technology, public ledgers, and digital assets are going to be important in the future, and then look at what company is positioning digital assets next to the biggest money. It is so obvious to me that Ripple is positioning XRP next to the big money. As they work with these institutions to upgrade their payment systems, as they work with these institutions to make their processes more efficient, these institutions are also going to be watching the digital asset ecosystem closely. To me, it's not hard at all to speculate to the fact that XRP is going to be one of the premier digital assets these institutions are going to be looking at. So for me, whether or not it's a question of these institutions holding XRP, in my eyes, there's zero doubt about it. These institutions are going to be holding digital assets. I think everyone agrees to that. And I think XRP is just being positioned right in front of them as a digital asset that they are going to want to hold. They're going to see what Ripple did for them building their private payment systems. They're going to see what Ripple did building public payment systems and just say, okay, we have trust in this XRP thing. We see Ripple doing all this good stuff. We see XRP has all these good use cases. Why don't we bring on XRP as an investment vehicle? So many people focus so much on the utility itself. So many people focus so much on the network. And while I think all of that is absolutely critical to the success of a digital asset, sometimes we forget about the speculative nature of these assets. There was actually a report that came out the other day that said 85% of price appreciation in a digital asset comes from speculation. And this is exactly what the big institutions have been doing for years. They speculate on currency, they speculate on bonds, they speculate on debt. And in the future, they're also going to be speculating on digital assets. To me, it is so obvious that XRP is going to be perfectly positioned to be a premier digital asset that these institutions are going to be speculating on. So that's why when I hear people saying these institutions are never going to use XRP, XRP. They're just going to use private ledgers, and that's not XRP. I kind of just sit there and laugh. I think at the end of the day, it is so easy for most of us to see the fact that as Ripple builds these next generation payment systems for the biggest money in the entire world, it is going to be an easy choice for these institutions to diversify their portfolio into things like XRP and maybe even start interacting their private blockchains with things like the public XRP ledger. As money flows in, I think we all know where the price of XRP goes as a result of this. That's why when I look at all the cryptocurrencies out there, I look at XRP almost completely different from the rest. While all these other cryptos are focusing on retail projects, NFTs, or DeFi solutions that not a single institution will ever touch, Ripple is working with the big institutions, building what they want, and putting XRP right next to them for later down the road. Anyway, guys, thank you so much for coming. I hope you enjoyed this update. I hope I at least put to bed some FUD you've been hearing. And for now, Mickle out.